Hi, folks, welcome back to the part 6 of manual testing series. So, in this, we will talk about waterfall model. This is the model which comes in the top of the SDLC models. Let's get started. The waterfall model is the first process model to be introduced. It is also referred to as linear sequential life cycle model, which means that, as I told, it is the first process in the waterfall, is the first process in the SDLC model. Okay, it is referred as linear as well as sequential life cycle model because it starts with the first phase, and after the first phase is completed, and the next phase comes into picture. After the second phase is completed, and the next phase comes into picture. So that is how the linear and then the sequential model works, which is waterfall model. It's very simple to understand and use. Okay. In waterfall model, each phase must be completed before the next phase can begin, and there is no overlapping in the phases. Okay, which means that suppose we will understand it clearly through the diagram, but for example, there is a first requirement analysis phase. If that is completed, then the next phase comes into picture. So there will not be any overlap. So once everything is documented and then the requirement is ready, so then only the design comes into picture. So until the requirement is free, the next phase will not be taken up. So that is how waterfall model works. In the waterfall approach, the whole process of the software development is divided into separate phases. Waterfall model, typically the outcome of one phase acts as the input for the next phase sequentially. Let's understand it. So this is how the different phases of waterfall model. First is requirement analysis, system design, implementation, testing, deployment, and maintenance. So these are the different phases. Okay. So first we will understand what is requirement analysis. So requirement analysis is nothing but, suppose there is a client who comes to you and asks you to develop a particular software. Okay. So now you have to sit with the client and understand what is his need, what is his requirement. Okay. So once he collects all the requirement, so then the next step comes into picture. But before that, all the requirement needs to be documented. Okay. And then it has to be freezed first. Okay. So once this requirement is freezed, next phase comes into picture, which is system design. Okay. So this works in a sequential. Okay. And then it is a linear model. One after the other, it will work. So sequentially, after requirement analysis is done, then the system design comes into picture, implementation comes into picture, testing and deployment, maintenance. Each one of them comes into picture one after the other. Once the requirement is freezed, then system design comes into picture. So in the system design, we know that if you have already seen the SDLC video, you will get to know that in system design, we know that there are two different phases under system design. One is high level design and then low level design, right? So once all this are covered, all the requirement is gathered now, and then it is architecturally ready. Okay. And now implementation comes into picture. Implementation is nothing but the coding part. Coding part is where the developers, okay, here the developers comes into picture. And in the implementation phase, all the based on the design, developers will start to implement it, implement via code. So they once the development is completed, once all the requirement analysis is done, designing is done, implementation will be done. So all these three phases will happen one after the other. Lastly, testing phase comes into picture. So testing phase is where tester comes into picture. And in this phase, we have to do all the requirement analysis, and then we have to check how it is working. So before that, we will have to understand and write the test cases related to that. Okay, after the analysis is done. So in this testing phase, we will understand and then we will application and then we will start testing the application. Okay. So once the testing is done, now it's time to deploy the code to the production. So till now, that in the testing phase, we'll be testing it in the QA environment, either in staging environment or in the UAT environment. So before that, after completing QA and then the staging, staging as well as the pre-prod, whatever we call, is done, then we will be moving it to production. So after it is moved to the production, the things will be almost done. But after that, maintenance comes into picture only in case if there is any spilled to the production, and then if we want to fix it, then the maintenance comes into picture, or if there is small gradation is required, that is where the maintenance comes into picture. Okay, so this is whole story of waterfall model. So sequentially, one after the other will be done. So once the requirement is freezed, designing will be done, development will be done, testing is done, and then deployment is done. Finally, the maintenance phase. So these are the different phases in the waterfall model. So let's understand what are the advantages and disadvantages of using this waterfall model. It's simple and easy to understand and use. So you saw that it is simple to understand, right? It's not that difficult to understand. And then using this model, it is easy. Easy to manage due to the rigidity of the model. Each phase has specific deliverables and a review process. Okay. So in this waterfall model, actually, in the requirement phase itself, all the requirement SRS document, whatever we call, right, or the requirement document, all this will be prepared and well documented. So the requirement analysis phase outcome will be the input of the next phase, which is the designing phase, right? So that's how this model works. And then the outcome of whatever the requirement or the system design that we'll do will be the input to the next phase, which is the implementation phase. So that's how phases are processed and completed one at a time. Okay, each one will be done, and then the next phase comes into picture. Works well for smaller projects where the requirements are very well understood. Okay, if the project is small, where it is required just one time implementation, then it is well work, basically, you would say. This works well with the smaller projects, clearly defined stages. Okay, each stage has its own output, and then the however we saw it. So in the same fashion, it works. Easy to arrange tasks, process and results are well documented. So these are the advantages of waterfall model. Coming to the disadvantages, no working software is produced until late during the life cycle. Okay. Later part we will study about the other models also, but before that, just understand that the outcome of the whole product, whatever, if we want to see that whole product, then we have to wait for a long time, because until this testing is done and then the deployment is done, there will be, you can just see it while implementation, but it takes a lot of time for the implementing it to the production or real time users. Okay, high amounts of risk and uncertainty. There will be a lot of risk also. Suppose in case if the client comes back and asks that, no, let us change a bit in the requirement. So then it is a difficult task, because this model works in the linear and then sequential fashion, right? So at that time, it is very risky, not a good model for complex projects at all, because once uh, because in complex projects what happens is there will be a frequent change in the requirements. Okay, so it depends on the customer, and then if they want to change something at that time, it will be a very difficult task. So it's not suitable for the complex projects, not suitable for the projects where the requirements are moderate to high risk of changing. So risk and uncertainty is high with this process model. Okay, so as we have already discussed about the risk in implementing it, if it has the change in the requirement, right? Because again, it has to go through the requirement analysis, okay, and then understanding it and then changing it. It is a tedious task, okay. It is not that easy, also. It is difficult to measure the progress within the stages, okay. How much it is progressed, all that it is difficult to track. Cannot accommodate changing requirements. So we have already spoken about it. Integration is done as Big Bang at the very end, which does not allow identifying any technological or business bottleneck or challenges early. Okay, so this will not identify the bottlenecks or any challenges later. Also, there are chances of facing any suppose the requirement is accepted. Okay, so once the requirement is accepted, and we will not get to know what type of risk is associated during the implementation. Okay, or what type of risk is associated during the testing phase. We'll not get to know what are the challenges in the previous phase only. So that's how this will not well work. This will not actually a good model or suitable model in case of changing requirement or any of the challenges we will not be able to identify priorly. So hope you learned what is waterfall model and then what are the different phases of waterfall model, advantages and disadvantages of waterfall model. Hope you have liked this video. If you have liked it, please do like it, share it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you are visiting for the first time. For watching, bye bye.